So I want to reopen the conversation that we started with Oscar this morning. So, but I want to locate this historically, so I'll be more a bit like doing a little bit what Nicholas was doing. So trying to talk about this in very specific ways and trying to see how it functions, how it also relates to socio-political. It's not going to be as interesting as Nicholas's very vivid story about the house as biography, but there is something of that in trying to look at the drawings very, very pointedly. Now, I'm going to read. It's a little bit. It's always subject of debate. I shouldn't read or I should read, but it's safer in a way to read because I won't go on and on forever. So I want to understand the very nature of the drawing themselves, so that I really want to know how they function. And I think that's the motivation from Neil's collection, is to see architectural drawing as a specific species of drawings, and which function in a very special way. And I think one thing we could probably all agree on is that architectural drawings have a projective. I wrote here, art historians might disagree, but I think architectural drawing have the specificity that they're projective. So they're always, in some ways, future-oriented. Now let's talk about this. So the Viollet-le-Duc Archives is an exceptional archive. It holds more than 20,000 objects. It's probably the largest architectural archive of any 19th century architects. At least in France, but this album is interesting because it's a bit odd. Because when you go in the archive in Paris now, you have all the albums which are there reunited, and they're all classified by topographically. So Île-de-France, Bourgogne, all the different provinces of France. So all of the drawings by Viollet-le-Duc are actually ordered by location, which you can imagine was a very handy mode of classification of these albums, so Viollet-le-Duc could actually know where everything is. This one doesn't work that way, and so two things strikes me about this album is, first, it's a high quality drawing. So the drawings in general are very, very high quality, because Viollet-le-Duc did thousands of drawings like this, and this particular collection is particularly refined drawings, and they're mostly of sculptures, capitals. So I didn't actually count and do statistics, but it seems that I would say about 50% of the drawings are actual capitals, and another maybe 40% are figures. Like this is a very famous drawing by Viollet-le-Duc which is the Le Beaux Yeux d'Amiens, which he will consider to be the model for the Christ figure for the future. A few drawings are not of his hands, so that's interesting. So you can actually see. I'm going to do a bit of comparative. So these drawings are not of his hand, and you see it. There's a question mark here, and here it says inconnu, unknown. So within that album, which is all Viollet-le-Duc, there's a few drawings that are not of his hand, and it bears two bookmarks. So it's interesting. Viollet-le-Duc's bookmark and his son-in-law, Maurice Ouradou. So, Neil and I had endless conversation about what that means. So were they...
How do you know they're not from his hand?
Sorry?
How do you know they're not from his hand? That he did not draw them? How do you know?
They're not from his hand. It's quite obvious. He would not draw drawings like that. The shadow's too deep. The outline is too sharp. I'll talk about this eventually. So. So the question was, is this a special album that Viollet-le-Duc himself started collecting while he was alive, and then when he died, his son-in-law took it over and put his bookmark and basically used it in his own practice, which was, he was a restoration architect and a neo-gothic architect, so he could have just did that. There's a few drawings that were added after Viollet-le-Duc, that's clear, but the majority are from his hand. So my sense, if there's no need to know precisely, it doesn't make a big difference, but I'm inclined to think that they were first assembled by Viollet-le-Duc and then passed on to his son-in-law, rather than the reverse, that his son-in-law chose drawings that were spread and decided to do his own album. So that's what I think it is, but there's no way to know. The thing that's safe to assume is that Uradu, so the son-in-law, would have used it himself as a useful repertoire of Gothic forms and ornaments for his own restoration work. And that's its function, a recueil of Gothic forms. So this is typical of 19th century architects working within a revivalist mode. In fact, you could probably make a thing that every, the classical architect had also its own recueil, and even today we have our own. So the idea that we actually have a sort of album, whatever form it takes to actually, from which we practice, I think is something that crosses over the centuries. It is, of course, specific for the revivalists insofar as they were confronted with, let's say, new styles. So the idea that they were reviving things that were not embedded so much such as the classical tradition required a certain repertoire of actual fragments. So you can actually do that work yourself. Now, before we go, and this is my title of my presentation is Gothic Put to Use. So, and that's what it means. It's Gothic details ready to be imitated and put into practice. So that's the first meaning of Gothic put to use. Now, I want to do a bit of a quick comparison, which is a bit kind of dramatic because I'm comparing things that are very spread. So let's first look at this. Some sheets of drawing taken from Adolfo Natalini's sketchbook number 12, which is in the collection here, of course, as you see. And this particular notebook was actually one of the instruments for the emergence of Superstudio's continuous monument, which was done in the summer-fall of 1969, assuming you're all familiar with the collages of the Superstudio's continuous monument. Now, I've pulled out these drawings where Natalini integrates historical objects in his vision of the absolute monument. So what I did here is there's a few in which obvious historical monuments are integrated in his vision of the monument. So the Colosseum, the Palazzo Chiricati, and the Palazzo Pitti. So in the nature of I don't want to dwell too long on this, but the nature of the operation is clear. The continuous monument subsumes the past. And I'm half quoting from Natalini here. By resuming its full power, architecture takes on an absolute character. And I quote, "The cube is the first and the last act in the history of architectural ideas." So Natalini looks back through the succession of events to a time immemorial in order to confirm the nature of the primordial architectural act. He even refers to dolmen and obelisks in his discussion of the monument. So he thus imaginatively projects beyond the detail, beyond the particularity of the ancient monument. That's what I want to insist, that he's not interested in the particularity of the monument. He has no need for such particularity. It is his quest, his projection, one that may serve his vision in his circumstances. So he recycles the past within an imaginative vision. I'm not criticizing this, I'm just trying to just say what it is. And he calls his drawing a visual diagram. And here's a passage that I'm a little bit quoting outside context in which he describes the act of drawing. But I thought it worked pretty well in describing those drawings, though I think he meant it in a more general way. But I quote here, "I have used sketching the way a fisherman uses a net. I have spent days weaving these nets, and many more mending them. For many long nights, I have cast nets, waiting until, like unpredictable twisting fish, ideas are caught in the net. I have used drawing like a hunter sets his traps." And I sort of couldn't think of a better description of the drawings in sketchbook 12, where historical monuments are literally cut in the net of a set of precise ink lines. In other words, cut in Natalini's search for new architectural beginnings. Subsumed by it, the authority of past monuments dissolved in the projection. He thus spreads the standardization of time, space, and matter, constructing an abstract framework into which all observable phenomena can fit. Now let's turn to another example, these drawings. This time on the other side of the historical divide, the Renaissance sketchbook of architect, we think Giovanni Antonio Dosio, dating from the mid-Cinquecento, so high Renaissance. It's considerably more difficult, I should say, right away in talking about this. I think it's very hard to pinpoint the Renaissance architect's relation to the past. Especially in the case of Dosio, of whom we know very little. He was an architect, but most well known as an accomplished antiquarian, and having published a set of views of Rome, which are quite famous, clearly reinforcing a mythical reading of antiquity. So so look at these here. Dosio, I would imagine that Dosio, and this is a bit my own. From my own knowledge of the Renaissance in general, would revel in the tactile intimacy of stone and marble. And also in the mystery of distance. Historical distance, that is. So contrary to Adolfo Natalini, Dosio is interested in the particularity of the ancient buildings he is surveying. And that, I think you can see this from, this is partly some drawings of the Colosseum. The others, I haven't identified which monuments he's drawing, whether it's actually ancient monuments or Renaissance buildings, because he did that too. So he gets very close to this object and analyzes in detail the various building elements. He relies, however, on orthographic projections, using even a straight edge. The use of that type of drawing has been strongly emphasized and systematized in the workshop of Antonio da San Gallo, especially in relation to the building of St. Peter's. So his aim, a very, could I say, provisional conclusion, because I haven't studied these drawings very much. His aim, I would assume, is to provide an objective record, which allows him to analyze basic principles of design, namely the set of proportions used in ancient buildings up to the very detail of the moldings. And you'll note, of course, that he numbers, it's full of numbers, particularly in the relationship proportions of the molding. So in a sense, he's not entirely different from Adolfo Natalini. So he's trying to abstract from ancient monuments a universal system, even if he does move closer to the object and is obviously very concerned about its very particularity. Like Natalini, he relies upon a fine incline, in his case to capture objectively the contours of the building elements. And ultimately, you could say the architecture is reduced, in a sense, to a set of numbers. In short, he is trying to abstract from the past a universal form of architecture, one that transcends its own historicity. Though I know it's a simplification, because I think apparently Dosio was himself reviving the Quattrocento. So it's interesting that he would have already a historical sense of the very Renaissance in which he was. So it's complicated, so it's very provisional. Anyway, it's an appeal to origins, not unlike Natalini. Now, following this brief, fairly rough comparative detour, we can now better place the Viollet-le-Duc album. Unlike Natalini and Dosio, what interests Viollet-le-Duc above all is the very subject of it, that is, the very subject of his drawing is history itself. The Gothic monument is a conduit into historicity. By historicity, I mean the quality of being part of history, embedded in it. Instead of a historical myth, it is what has once been. So in the 19th century, it is only history qua history that can make sense of the world. Historicity, however, cannot be captured by a single exemplary monument, because history in each of its moments constitutes a total, replete, immersive world. So it cannot be reduced to one building. Hence the strategy of fragments. And here I'll start moving a bit through this album, just showing a few selected. So the strategy of fragments, I'm just showing you examples of that. The sense of the whole is only attainable by the repetition, accumulation, and variations of a series of architectural elements. For instance, another example here. There's a lot of capitals that are. So the whole is only imaginatively conceivable. the fragment pointing towards the historical totality. Yet that imaginative wholeness can only be grasped through the very particularity of each fragment, and that's why I contrast these two. So let me get here just some that, I mean, any of those can illustrate what I'm saying, but I somehow felt I should, you know, he does very little detail fragments. In short, Viollet-le-Duc must shun abstraction as much as possible. This is achieved in several ways. 90% of the drawings in the Viollet-le-Duc album are perspective. There's a few orthogonal drawings, but the great majority are perspective. And we are given the monument and experience. We are looking at it. And this comes through. Or here's an example of. I like this one because the particular way of looking at monuments of Viollet-le-Duc is interesting. So when I say we're looking at a building and experience, it's not quite right because he actually scans the building in ways that no viewers could see it. So this is an example of a balustrade. I didn't take note of which building it is because they're all coming from different buildings as well. But it's just you're looking at it. You're looking at it, though it's a perspective that's not actually from the viewer's point of view. It's someone that's exploring the totality of the monument and it just travels through it in different ways. I like particularly this one. This is probably an early drawings that he's done when he was restoring Vézelay. So this probably dates around 1840. But you are looking at the monument, right? It's a perspective drawings. Also, a minimum of line work. Minimum of contours. The fragments drawn are not delineated. The trace gesture remains light, merely brushing the paper support. It marks its form only enough to be able to recognize it. Enough and no more. This sobriety achieves a strange sort of clarity, precise to the mere shadow, yet evanescent. Thanks to such lightness, Viollet-le-Duc's drawings are like, this is my claim here, are like souvenirs that leave only a fine trace on the paper. The drawing is in no way hollowed out or carved into the paper. It skims the surface. The hand never presses, following an economy of means. It's this one of the things I was struck by going through the drawings, like going through hundreds and hundreds of drawings, is this delicacy that always is in his drawings. It's very stunning. So you could make the claim these drawings littered across the 100 pages of this album mysteriously belong to two separate timescales. No longer an abstract archaeological record, they are shifters between past and present. They are memories. And you know, these in most instances, not all, but in most instances were drawn in situ. So it's basically Viollet-le-Duc drawing. There's no photograph that there's no mediation of photography here. So it's something he draws when he goes to the site. So when I say he scans the building in different ways, it's because he's traveling through the cathedral and like he's just exploring he's restoring them, rebuilding them. So he has access to all the places that normally people don't have access to. So if the 19th century no longer believes in the Renaissance myth of antiquity, it does believe in souvenir. I use the French word, I don't know, I'm not sure if it works in English. Souvenir. In the play of souvenir. The will to keep such evanescent lightness comes across particularly well when these drawings are translated as woodcuts in Viollet-le-Duc's Dictionnaire raisonné d'architecture du XIe and XVIe siècle. And here, it's not really in the text I'd written, but I was thinking about my presentation that there's a real distinction to be made between this album, which is very open-ended, and when it's integrated within the Dictionnaire raisonné, which has become then parts of a discourse. So the drawings then are part of actually reading a text. Whereas here they're more open-ended, obviously, and especially this one, because this one has no particular thematics, there's no particular topographical distinction, so it's really a free collection. So let me just go again back, showing you the same drawing that I've showed you before. So it's interesting, and then come and look because can see here the drawing drawn in situ and then engraved as a woodcut. So what I'm saying here is that the will to keep an evanescent lightness comes across particularly well in the translation, though you could claim this is much sharper and has deeper shadows. In fact, Viollet-le-Duc was working in trying to achieve actually a complete unity of tonal value between the typeface and the, so that there was no real sense of discontinuity. And actually I thought there was some actually particularly strong examples of that, like in these instances, for instance.
So it's the same, but mirrored. It's mirrored, right, because of the woodcut?
Yes, well, that's the thing. Sometimes it's mirrored, sometimes it's not.
It's changed quite a lot as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's completely recasted the... Oh, yeah, and he also does often restores the building when he engraves it. So people have always been stunned by that. Well, in a sense, it's normal. Why would he keep a thing that's broken? You know, this is not about, about runes, or it's about learning what Gothic was. So it seems normal that you would think that he would restore the fragments that he's illustrating. Anyway, you see here the softness.
Yeah. But it's not so much restoring; it's actually changing. So this kind of photo here becomes a trefoil.
Is it? Oh, that I didn't notice.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's actually changing the complete.
That would be, if that's the case, it would be pretty exceptional. No, he's not showing the same. Yes, this one. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this is lower.
There's nothing but.
Yeah, this is low. This is this. So he's not. He hasn't filled it in. Because he normally doesn't willfully. It does happen sometimes, but he doesn't willfully. He restores them, but he doesn't modify them. I'll quote one of. Here's another quote, which I think is valuable. It's a quote by one of his closest collaborators, an engraver called Claude Sauvageot, who wrote actually on Viollet-le-Duc's drawings, and he described Viollet-le-Duc's visual economy in the following terms. So this is a translation I've made from the French. The drawings by Viollet-le-Duc destined to be engraved are almost always conceived in a soft and golden chromatic scale, which gives them an air of indescribable grandeur and impressive stillness, but to which in most cases a network of etchings more or less skillfully carved cannot do full justice. So he's actually saying the softness of the original drawing cannot really successfully be rendered in the engravings. The strokes and the contours, such an essential part of a drawing, were always drawn by him using diluted ink. And this surprises me because most of the drawings we have are in pencil, so I'm not sure what he refers to. So I guess he must have done some in ink. Never a bold outline comes to disturb or compromise the general effect by attracting too much attention. He generally avoids casting sharp and dryly outlined shadows determined by the rules of mathematical projection. It is thanks to his long experience and his constant observations that he succeeds in being accurate and in producing a seductive impression from such toned-down effects. And the word in French here, toned-down effects, is a translation of the word demi-effet, half effect. So it's hard to translate, so I said toned-down effects. So thanks to this, so end of quote, thanks to this demi-effet, the woodcuts of the DRA, the Dictionnaire raisonné, keep the same tonal value as the text. They are reunited in the same imaginative matrix of science. The albums, and particularly the album put to use and disseminated through the volumes of the Dictionnaire, is, in my opinion, an instance of what Svetlana Boym has called restorative nostalgia at the core of nationalism. In other words, an attempt at a trans-historical reconstruction of the lost home in the name of truth and tradition. That is the nature of its socio-political dimension. This is definitely the project, Viollet-le-Duc's project. So the Dictionnaire is a political agenda. It's an instrument. In fact, it was described as an instrument of battle So it was very much, it was started printing at the beginning of the Second Empire. So he decided to do the dictionnaire when Napoleon III, just after the coup d'etat. So this notion of a trans-historical reconstruction of the lost home in the name of truth and tradition, I believe is the sociopolitical dimension of this. This is different because this is open, right? It's an open-ended collection, so it doesn't quite have the same purposeness in it. And the Dictionnaire raisonné, I think, compare, for instance, to Ruskin, as a say the Stones of Venice, as a socio-political instrument, instill a desire to build, unlike Ruskin, who basically you despair. You read Ruskin, you're just say, it's always difficult to know how architects have used Ruskin, because it's in some ways too late, right? I remember Ruskin, and I remember reading this a long time ago, so I cannot give precise details about it, but he was invited to speak at a Turner Stone ceremony, and he said, just don't even try, you cannot do it. You'll never be able to get the repleteness of the Gothic. So, but in the Dictionnaire raisonné, it's the opposite. You read the Dictionnaire raisonné, so it's really good with children. Children really have a great pleasure in flipping through the pages of the Dictionnaire raisonné, because it instills this desire to build. It's full of fragments. It's all you feel you're armed with the equipment that you need to be able to go out in the world and build, and therefore to get to work to rebuild a lost home and patch up the memory gaps. And Viollet-le-Duc's emphasis in his restoration work upon the unity of style. We know that from, say, Notre Dame, and it's his reputation that's sometimes a bit exaggerated, but he really wished a total reconstruction. He wanted us to be able to see the monument as it was in the Middle Ages. And nothing should disturb the total recreation of the original form. So, in a sense, and this is all a bit simplifications. So I wrote here, home in the dictionnaire is not made of individual memories, but of collective projections and rational delusions. But it is made of also a lot of private memories. So it's because, he did, as I think someone quoted a passage where I was saying that he had a peripatetic knowledge of the Gothic monuments in France. For sure, he spent his whole time going around and seeing these monuments himself. As I said, it did become an instrument of battle, turned against those who conspired against homecoming. He would never write it that way, of course. I put words in his mouth. Against the restoration, therefore, of our imagined community. And to be fair to Viollet-le-Duc, we may also say that his Gothic crusade also increased emancipatory possibilities as well. So there's a paradoxical things here, offering the possibility of multiple imagined communities that may not be exclusively based on ethnic or national principles. But he himself, eventually, after 1860, turned his attention to the historical myth of the Aryan race as a true foundation myth to restore and repossess the past. So he himself really is, with a vengeance, after 1860, following his contacts with Gobineau, that it became his reading of architecture. So most of his reading, so if you read, for instance, the article Sculpture in the 8th volume or 9th, I forget now, of the Dictionnaire raisonné, he shows the Beaux Dieux d'Amiens, so the figure of Jesus I've shown at the beginning, and he racially described the figure of Jesus. So it becomes, for him, Jesus was the man at his maximum vitality, at its maximum power. He even as in the archive of very interesting, and this would interest Oscar, he has a very interesting passage in which he makes the devil speaks. And the devil says, he says to man in general, without me, you could have done nothing. It's thanks to me that you evolved from the monkey and you lost your tail, and he goes on and on and on, and this about that the devil made the work. The devil is the person who sweated through the evolution and progress of man and all of this. But he describes Christ in the same way. So, Christ is the person who actually fought, was able to fight, and was really, he had a sort of Gnostic reading of Christianity, so that it was always about a battle of the truth and between the good and the bad. So in the end, there's a certain fusion between the devil, and that's very common in 19th century literature, so it's not something special to him, between the devil and the figure of Christ. That one is a female version, so the figure of Jesus, and that's why he's so interested in his physiognomy, is the soft and the welcoming, the who forgives. And then the devil is the male version that actually, in some ways, what's the word used by Georges Sand, of the legitimate, she calls it not legitimate violence, but legitimate revolt. The devil represents this legitimate revolt. So it was actually a metaphor for the left. So that, the devil was actually sometimes used by the left as a way of they use also the figure of Jesus as being, the justifying revolution and revolt. But in the case of Viollet-le-Duc, to just close, for him it was really, he naturalized the idea of battle. Like battle was the nature of the world. It is the way the world works is through, it's Gnostic, it's through a constant struggle. And it's through struggle that man achieves. And he had a certain fatalistic, so he didn't so truly believe in progress in some ways, so we associate him with the, virtue of progress, but he had a certain fatalistic, many of the racists at that, that it was all over. But, anyway, it's a complex, I think I'm diverting too much right now. But, so this, I'm just trying to place this. It's important to understand the shift between this and that. And what happens when it is part of a discourse, which is it's a fantastic book, by the way. When I'm criticizing Viollet-le-Duc, I'm not the type to forget how incredible his power was in actually describing and making palpable the Gothic. And it's a fantastic book to read how monuments were shaped and by all sorts of conditions, historical, social, at all sorts of levels. But the Gothic builder is the Gothic man, the true French man, is the person always ready for battle, that's capable of engaging his environment in a forceful, will is the word, willfulness. So in that sense, as has been said before, he completely he has a fairly unorthodox reading of Christianity, because after all, these cathedrals were churches. But he had his own reading. So it's interesting when you go, and at Notre Dame, now you can't go, but when it's reopened, there's the crucifix that he designed for the high altar, and it's completely a Gnostic vision of Christ. We have drawings of it, and it's this absolutely, angry Christ that's like, not suffering, just, and the whole thing is a sort of Art Nouveau thing that is animated, and he puts this right in the Notre Dame on the high altar. It's quite remarkable because it's completely not a orthodox reading of the representation of Christ on the cross. So I find Oscar, I don't know, where are you, Oscar? Because I thought you were quite a nice intuition of putting these two things that you started your presentation, because I think those two drawings are very, very important for him. Anyway, so And your drawings, I thought, had this kind of strange battle into them, which in a way reveals something that's embedded, despite the fact that this is so delicate and soft, and it wants to be just ready to enter your mind. It just penetrates. So you call it boring, but you said because they're a bit boring because they're not vivid like.
One had to come right.
It's interesting. When I was looking at this with Neil, we used a iPhone and just to blow up some of these drawings, and it's the I have a iPhone 10, and it's this hyper device that actually makes things more precise and actually emphasizes differences more than your eyes can do it. So you can see that there is a contour line that's done, and actually I forgot I had some drawings I wanted to show you where there's a drawing where you actually see the drawing being built from pure contour to pure shadow. So, and now it would take too long to find. But anyway, it's interesting to analyze the drawings using this and how the work of the shadow and the work of the line and the etching is so evanescent and so, it just kind of barely floats above. It's like a spectral presence, which I think works for his project. But you could say, well, it can be different projects, so it doesn't have to be nationalist, racist, but it so happens that that's what he was involved in. So I'm not trying to make myself interesting by talking about this racism. I'm just saying what it is. So it really became a very strong obsession, and.
You were saying, or I mean, that this was your presentation. Sorry.
Yes, I'm done. Yes, I'm done. I'm done. Okay. Sorry. Thank you.